Are you looking for ways to strengthen your marriage? Would you like to raise children you enjoy being around? Do you long for a peaceful, orderly home that's a blessing to everyone who comes through its doors? Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jennifer Flanders, a Bible-believing, homeschooling mother to 12 and host of the Loving Life at Home podcast. Join me as we discover what God's Word has to say about marriage, motherhood, and minding the things that matter most. Hello, friend. Welcome to episode 88 of Loving Life at Home. This week I want to discuss the importance of learning to accept the things about yourself that are truly unchangeable. My daughter Rachel has been home from Europe for the last week and a half. She'll be flying back to Germany on Saturday to finish her year-long commitment living and working there as an au pair to a family with 5 children. But we've sure enjoyed having her home for the past 10 days. We've tried to eat her favorite foods and play her favorite games and watch her favorite movies and do all the other stuff that she hasn't gotten to do for the 9 months she's lived abroad. One of those things is sitting out on the little patio in our backyard, reading books and soaking up the sun. So she and I did that for a long time yesterday, and then my daughter Abby eventually joined us as well. Couple that with the fact that I've been walking a mile or more every day alongside my husband, and we also spent some time on the pickleball court last Saturday, our first, but probably not our last time to ever try that sport. Doug was a natural, I was not, but neither was I as big a handicap as we both expected me to be. Anyway, the point is, after all that time in the sun, my skin is looking a little browner than normal, and I'm not sure if I'm really getting a tan or if my freckles are just melding together, but the situation reminded me of the summer that I turned 10, because that year it was a case of melded freckles for sure, and I spent an inordinate amount of time that summer obsessing over my appearance. What had begun a few years earlier as a smattering of freckles across the bridge of my nose had eventually morphed into one solid brown blotch that stretched from ear to ear. I had a similarly speckled cousin whose concern about her own freckles spawned this newfound insecurity about my own, but fortunately my cousin told me that she knew a surefire cure: lemon juice. So she and I spent a full week daily assailing our cheeks with lemon wedges, bent on bleaching those brown splotches right out of our skin. But this rubbing ritual proved a complete waste of time, not to mention a waste of lemons. My freckles didn't budge, nor did their color fade in any appreciable way. Fortunately for my citrus-soaked complexion, I later noticed a different cousin using an eyebrow pencil to draw freckles on her otherwise porcelain skin. I was stunned. If this beautiful cousin of mine thinks freckles are so great that she's artificially trying to paint them on her face, then why in the world am I trying to get rid of them? I thought to myself. I'd later have a similar realization about my bone-straight hair when I saw an older curly-headed cousin using huge orange juice cans to straighten her hair. If straight hair is so desirable that she'd go to all that trouble, then why would I endure the torture of any more at-home perms? It was just like Dr. Seuss's story of the Sneetches on the beaches with stars upon their bellies. The absurdity of the situation hit home. In that moment, when I saw those artificial eyebrow penciled freckles, I resolved to lay off the lemon juice treatments forever. I decided to accept my unchangeables and be grateful for the way God made me, freckles and all. I haven't given those brown blotches much thought since, except to marvel over how they faded on their own as I've aged, or about how much more they stand out, especially the ones around my lips, when I'm especially cold or have just given birth, or both. As momentous as those freckles seemed to my 10-year-old self, I realize now my early struggles were child's play. Some people have to cope with far more serious physical challenges, incurable diseases, debilitating injuries, vision loss, infertility, or mental illness. The key to navigating such trials successfully is to avoid the pitfalls of bitterness, resentment, and self-pity. The prayer that hung on the wall of my grandmother's bedroom is a fitting one for this discussion. The words were by, I think, Reinhold Niebuhr, and the little plaster plaque was actually one that I finger painted for my grandmother, which was actually a lot prettier than it sounds. But it read, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference." We should work to improve our situation, certainly. Use every resource God provides. If you can change what ails you through therapy or surgery or diet, medication, or some equally valid treatment plan, then by all means change it. But for circumstances that can't be altered, you need to cast your cares upon Jesus because he cares for you, as 1 Peter 5:7 tells us is the case. A big part of finding peace is learning to accept certain unchangeables in our lives. The lessons I learned as a young girl with unwanted freckles applies to far weightier issues as well. If we can come to accept such unchangeables, to embrace them, to even perhaps feel a measure of gratitude for them, or at least gratitude for what God is teaching us through them, then we will experience a deeper joy for living than we've ever known before. But such acceptance requires us to make peace with each of the following areas. First, we have to accept our parentage. You don't get to pick your mom and dad, nor do you get to decide whether your parents divorce or stay married, or whether they live to be 100 or die while you're just a baby, or whether they're loving and supportive and involved in your life, or cold and distant and aloof. I hear from listeners all the time who yearn for a closer relationship with one or both of their parents, and it's really heartbreaking. And while you can certainly pray for your parents, and I'll link a free printable prayer guide for doing just that in today's show notes, and you can reach out and do everything in your power to foster a warm and mutually encouraging relationship with your parents, you have no control over if or how your mom or dad will respond. And at some point, you have to make peace with that situation and accept it for what it is. If you have wonderful parents like I did, praise the Lord. If you don't or didn't, thank God that he is a father to the fatherless, as we're told in Psalm 68:5, and look to him to fill the void that your negligent or abusive parents left in your life. Another area of unchangeability is your genetics. Your DNA came preloaded as well. The blueprint for your body was determined from the first moment of conception. It cannot be altered. Psalm 139 tells us that each of us is fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God knit us together in our mother's womb. I know we live in a fallen world, and that sickness and disease have wreaked havoc on all of creation, but God is still on his throne, and he is still intimately involved in the formation of life, and he has a plan and a purpose for the unique DNA he gave you at that very first moment of conception. So our lives and our genetics should gratefully be accepted for the miraculous gifts they are, and appreciated and used for God's glory. Another unchangeable that we must all make peace with is our era in history. As much as you may long for the good old days, you have to live in the historical time period you've been given. There's no changing that fact. Some people like to romanticize the past. They focus on all the good things about living in the 80s or the 50s or the 1800s or whatever other era has currently captivated their imagination, but they forget about the hardships. Every age has its struggles and its challenges. Why should ours be any different? I've been attending a book club this summer with a group of women from my church. We're reading Lies Women Believe by Nancy DeMoss Wolgemuth. And just last night, we were discussing some of the challenges that we currently face in our culture, especially with technology, that prior generations never had to grapple with. And one of those ladies wistfully said something about wishing she could just go back to the 1800s and live like the folks during Laura Ingalls Wilder's childhood. I love the Little House books just as much as the next person, and I understand that sentiment. But for one, I just finished reading The Long Winter a few weeks ago, and I know for a fact it wasn't all barn dances and carriage rides back then. Sometimes it was grinding wheat in a coffee mill and twisting hay to keep warm because 7 months of blizzards left the town with no coal and very, very little food. But aside from that, I'm grateful to be living in this current age because I have 3 sons with type 1 diabetes who would likely have died within 6 months of diagnosis if they'd been born in the 1800s, because I don't think insulin replacement therapy came available until the 1920s or so. Also, I've read that before the advent of modern medicine, and especially antibiotics, 1 in 5 women died in childbirth. I tried to look up that statistic again today to make sure I was remembering it correctly, and I saw another that indicated that as many as 1 in 3 died giving birth or due to complications that arose during delivery. So with 12 children, I might have died 4 times over if I had lived a couple of centuries centuries ago, which is another reason I'm grateful to have been born at exactly the time God chose for me, despite the various challenges our age has to face. Another unchangeable is your brain function. You don't get to pick your IQ or your mental capacity or what learning style suits you best, but you do get to choose how you'll use what you've been given. I don't think any of us use anywhere near our full capacity in that respect, so there's a lot of room for improvement. Even if you didn't get to pick the range, your habits and discipline can affect where you fall within that given range. The parable of the talents that we read in Matthew 25 fits this discussion well. Those servants didn't have any say over how many talents they were given by their master. One was given 5, another got 2, and still another was entrusted with just a single talent. But each man got to determine how he would use what he was given, whether he would invest his talents wisely and nurture and grow and multiply them, or he would do nothing at all with this gift except to dig a deep hole and hide it away. Well, we get that same opportunity with the brains that God gives us. We should all use what we've been given to the best of our abilities while praying that God would bless and multiply and increase our efforts. Another unchangeable is our ethnicity. You may be able to change what country you live in. As I mentioned before, our daughter is currently living in Germany, and one of our sons now resides in South Korea. But none of us have any control over the country where we were born, our country of origin, or over the color of our skin, or many other things related to our ethnic background. They're also all out of our control. Another thing you have to be willing to accept is your birth order. Are you an only child? The oldest? The youngest? Somewhere in the middle? You have no control over whether or not you have siblings or where you fall out among them. You only have control over how you respond to your given family members, whether you have many or just a few. Will you cheer them on and encourage them and seek to build them up like 1 Thessalonians 5:11 tells us to do? Or will you fall into the comparison and jealousy trap that James 3:14 through 16 warns us against? Family history is something else over which you have no control. You cannot change what your ancestors did in the past, or even what your extended family does in the present. Sometimes having a famous or infamous relative leaves you feeling as if you can never escape his or her shadow, especially when that person is closely related. If he's well known for doing something great, you may feel pressured to live up to his reputation, almost like people's expectations of you are unrealistically high. And if that person has a reputation for doing something bad, you may feel like others regard you with undeserved suspicion. If your relative lies or steals or drinks excessively or sleeps around, people may assume you do the same. It's really sad, but that's how it often plays out. You may be able to distance yourself from that person. You may even be able to find ways to minimize the embarrassment or reduce the pressure you feel as a result of the name that person has built for himself, for good or bad, but you can't alter the fact that you're related. That's another unchangeable with which you must make peace. Yet another unchangeable is past mistakes and mishaps. Although you can certainly learn from mistakes, both those that you make yourself and those that others have made that adversely affect you, you can never go back and undo them, nor can you avoid all their consequences. Likewise, while we can certainly take precautions to avoid mishaps, careless accidents still happen, and when they do, all the what-ifs in the world won't undo their sometimes devastating results. Think of the diving accident that led to Johnny Erickson Tada's paralysis. No matter how often she might have rehearsed in her mind a different way for that summer day in her teens to play out, there's no changing the fact that a single split-second decision to jump into the lake headfirst left her without the use of her arms and legs for life. Yet, what a good and God-glorifying life she has lived, one that would not have been possible had she become consumed with bitterness over her fate instead of humbly accepting this unfortunate unchangeable and learning how to give praise and honor to God as a quadriplegic in the midst of it. And the last two unchangeables are aging and mortality. Hair color, collagen creams, and plastic surgeons may help mask the signs of aging, but there's no denying the fact that we're all growing older. Our flesh is wasting away. In Genesis 3:19, God reminds Adam, "For dust you are, and to dust you will return." We don't even have to wait until death to see the truth of that statement realized. We start returning to dust from the moment we're born. By the time you're an adult, you'll lose on average 500 million skin cells a day. That's 500 million left-off cells. I've read that as much as 80% of the dust in our homes is actually dead skin cells, which is pretty gross. But a more recent article put that percentage at 20 to 50%, saying that the majority of dust in most homes is made up of fabric fibers and pet dander and stuff like that. But considering the fact that our family has 0 indoor pets and 7 to 8 family members currently living on the premises, plus many more that come to visit regularly, I'm guessing the 80% estimate is probably more accurate for our home. Either way, making peace with the fact that unless the Lord returns before it happens, we will all eventually age and die might spare you a few worry lines in the future. And while we're on the topic of aging, I'll share a little beauty tip with you. I've found something that makes all my fine lines and wrinkles disappear immediately. Would you like to know what it is? I just take off my reading glasses before I look in the mirror. My skin instantaneously looks 10 to 20 years younger whenever I do that, no matter what kind of lighting I'm under. Come to think of it, that may be why I don't normally notice my freckles anymore either. The point is, aging is inevitable. You're not going to look like you're in your 20s when you're in your 60s. My husband took me to see the new Mission Impossible movie a couple of weeks ago, and even Tom Cruise doesn't look 20 anymore. He looks good, but he doesn't look 20. And that's okay. I wouldn't want to look 20 at 60 either. I'm fine with aging. We all age, although I would really like to do it just as graciously as I can. We will also all die if Christ tarries. My days are numbered, and so are yours. James 4 tells us our lives are but a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Accepting the unchangeable fact of our own mortality reminds us to use wisely the time that God has given us on this earth. Or, as Psalm 90:12 puts it, to number our days so that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. I first heard this concept of accepting unchangeables at a seminar I attended way back in high school. They may have talked about a few things I didn't include on my list or vice versa. I don't remember for sure, but I'll try to look up that original source and include a link in the show notes in case you're interested, if I can find it. The week-long seminar was put on by a group called Institutes of Basic Life Principles. Their teaching was pretty polarizing back then, and it's probably even more so today. A couple of the Duggar girls, I think it was Ginger and Jill, wrote about their experience with IBLP in the books that they authored a few years ago. I read one of them. I think it was called Becoming Free Indeed, and my husband read the other. I'll include a link to the book review I wrote about Ginger's book and the show notes too, in case you're interested. The Duggars were far more involved with this organization than I ever was, but as for attending that seminar, I approached it the same way I approach everything else I read or listen to, and that is by trying to eat the meat and spit out the bones. But this teaching about accepting our unchangeables, I found to be true and good and very helpful, because all these areas together combine to make us the unique individuals we are. The Bible paints a beautiful picture of the care with which God made each of us. Psalm 139:13 through 16 reads, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written, the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." Isn't that reassuring? God had a purpose for designing you exactly as he did. But until you're able to rejoice in that design and to accept the unchangeable features that he gave you, you'll have a hard time discovering his purpose. So let's give him thanks and praise and stop resenting the way he made any part of us. Gratitude, acceptance, submission, these attitudes prepare our hearts to fulfill God's plan for our lives. Of course, perfect understanding of his purpose and design will likely not come this side of heaven. He may grant us glimpses, but we are limited in our ability to appreciate the full scope of God's intentions towards us. Still, we can be confident that he will work all things together for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose, just as he's promised to do in Romans 8:28.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you have a question you'd like to hear covered on this podcast, message me on Instagram at Flanders_family or contact me through my website, lovinglifeathome.com. Before you go, if you've been encouraged by something you've heard on the show, do me a favor and forward the link to a friend or head over to Loving Life at Home on Apple iTunes to subscribe and leave a written review of the show. Your doing so will help others find me so they can listen too. Until next time, I pray the Lord will bless your efforts to build a loving home life centered on Him.